Hello everybody, my name is Glenn Curry and welcome to The River, living on the St. Lawrence. Recently I had the opportunity to sit down and speak to Josh Todd and Alex Hammond about the greatest river in the world. The St. Lawrence is not only the connection between the Great Lakes and the Atlantic Ocean, it's also one of the best rivers for fishing. In fact, Abu Garcia, one of the leading names in the fishing industry, proclaimed the St. Lawrence as the best fishing river in the country. That's great news, and one of the many reasons why we created a series of shows highlighting the St. Lawrence River. Now here's our first episode where we talk about the great fishing on the river. We hope you enjoy The River, living the St. Lawrence. This is the most exciting thing, guys. I read recently that Abu Garcia stated that the St. Lawrence River has the best fishing in America. Did you hear about that, Alex?
Yeah, most certainly. I mean, it's one of those things where different people have ranked us the best fishing, best bass fishing, all these different things, and it's because they come here and they catch bass bigger than anywhere in the world. Mm-hmm. I think it's partly because of the gobies. Yeah, which is another thing. The Seaway brought these Russian ships that bring this invasive species, and then initially we were like, oh my god, the goby, because they were eating all of the walleye eggs, and then it's been the exact opposite now. Right. Now the bass and the walleye are completely eating them because that's part of their ecosystem now, I guess, and making these huge bass that anglers can't believe that they're catching here. I mean, I'm not that old, but I remember when I was coming up, 10 years old fishing, if you caught a goby, you were supposed to kill it. Like, oh, that's a piece of crap fish. Like, kill it. They're eating all the walleye eggs and stuff. And now, 15 years later, here we are, and everyone's like, oh, the gobies are great. That's what keeps these bass huge. So
Waddington had the Bass Masters tournament, but due to COVID, it was moved to Clayton. Why was that, Alex?
Yeah, so I'll just kind of go back a little bit here. So 2013 was the first time we had the tournament in Waddington. It was a huge, huge thing. Nothing like this had ever been done. The governor flew up. It was great. They loved it so much, they came back 2 years later, 2015. Loved it so much again, they came back 2017. In 2017, they signed a 3-year contract. And it was the first 3-year contract Bass had ever signed, because usually they try to, space it out, go to different places. But the anglers loved it so much in Waddington, and specifically on the St. Lawrence River, that they just wanted to stay in Waddington and keep coming back every year. So we had that contract signed. They came back in 2018, 2019, and then 2020 hit, and it was the last year of our contract. Unfortunately, COVID-19 happened. So between the county health department and the state health department, it just wasn't able to be worked out between the quarantine for all these different anglers coming from different states. Fortunately, Jefferson County, their public health had a little bit of different, what would you call it, regulations?
Parameters to work by.
Yeah, so Clayton stepped up to the plate. And what I love about it is it saved the tournament from still happening. Right. And it still happened on the St. Lawrence River, and they still caught those same type of fish. Guess what? Anglers were still driving their boats from Waddington all the way down to Clayton. Oh, yeah. And even in the first tournament, there was one guy who won, was going all the way to the lake. Yeah. And they changed the tournament rules that you couldn't go to the lake anymore because that guy would just go all the way to the lake, fish for 45 minutes, and drive all the way back, and he'd catch the most bass in the biggest limit.
When it was in Waddington.
When it was in Waddington in 2013. Yep. The winner that year would drive whatever it was, 4 hours down the river to go to the lake.
Ways,
and then all the way back. And he only had about an hour of fishing. He caught he won that year.
Right.
So they changed the rules, kept it exactly on the river so you couldn't go into the lakes. And it's great. It's just a great thing for Waddington. It's a great thing for the entire river and the communities that surround it.
But that's interesting, Alex, because last year they did go into went as far as Henderson and Sackett's Harbor. Some of the fishermen, so
Right.
because they were in Clayton, would that mean since the proximity to the lake they were allowed to do it last year?
I'm sure they had some rule changes due to COVID and everything like that. But I think just because so you can't go past Messina,
Right.
up where we are. So everything is technically up the river, right? Everything's up the river, Clayton, A Bay, everything up that way. So you can't really go south, or I guess it's technically northeast, up the river, down the river to Messina. So the thing with Waddington is, if we're getting into the history here,
Sure. No doubt.
The Seaway has created what we have in Waddington. The reason why we have the place that we can actually hold the festival is because it's all owned by the New York State Power Authority. There wasn't anything allowed to be built on it because it's New York State owned property. That's something that has been a bone of contention in Waddington and other affected communities over the years. But now when you see that we have this huge park that's, I can't even tell you how many acres that is, probably 20 or 30 acres of just a park that you can set up trailers and tents and this huge festival. This is all pre-COVID and hopefully post-COVID. It's changed people's perception of the Power Authority in Waddington and of the state in Waddington and of these bass anglers. It's great. Before there was a lot of animosity. We lost an entire street of our village, and I'd say probably close to 50 homes because the Power Authority had to come through with the Seaway in 1955 and buy out those properties and expand the river so that we could have the shipping channel. So I think now we're finally seeing, instead of people saying, they took our land, now they're saying, I wouldn't say thank God they took our land, but because they took our land, now we're reaping the benefits now because places like Clayton, places like Ogdensburg that didn't get affected by this, by the Seaway, don't really have the same type of facilities on the land as we do because of the help from the Power Authority and the Seaway.
So Waddington has the 3-year contract for the Bassmasters, but will it ever come back to Clayton, Alex?
So I know Clayton is trying, and I support them. But being from Waddington, I can tell you we are holding the Bassmaster tournament this year, the Elite Series.
Gotcha.
July, I think it's middle of July. We're holding that. We've been in talks. Obviously, with COVID, it's a different ball game, but the plan is to plan as if we were going to hold this tomorrow, and hopefully less and less restrictions will be in place by the time we get there. So there's a bunch of stuff going on, but I think the coolest part about the talks right now, as far as holding it in Waddington, is it's never really brought people downtown. It's brought people to Whitaker Park, which is the park I was just explaining. That's a good 20 acres. With the COVID restrictions, looking at the glass half full, you can have more people at the event if there isn't food at the event. So what we're thinking about is actually having food vendors and whatnot on Main Street with some type of shuttle system.
Right.
So you can have you can maximize the people you can have down at the actual weigh-ins and watching the boats go out, and then shuttle them when they need food and beverage to our downtown Main Street so that they can utilize the property down there, utilize the vendors down there, and then, this might be getting ahead of myself here, but that's also why we're looking at building the marina at the end of Main Street in Waddington, because right now we have about, give or take 30 boat slips, and we're looking to double that in order to kind of ramp ourselves out of this pandemic.
So at the end of the day, Alex, this increases fishing traffic big time, and you're getting fishermen from all over the country. And as far as the Bassmasters Elite Tournament is concerned, you're getting them from all over the world. We saw a couple of fishermen from Japan, and they were very elated with the area. They seemed like the next tournament, by the way, was in Burlington on Lake Champlain. It didn't seem like they wanted to go there. They wanted to stick around here. That's what I noticed, at least.
Yeah.
So it was great weather, but the other factor is that they weren't allowed to go on the Canadian side. Without COVID, could they also fish on the other side of the channel, Alex?
So the thing is and you might want to ask the Border Patrol guy here, but specifically, from what I know, as long as they don't turn off their engine, and that might be a new thing that they changed, but I know they can fish the channel. They can't, obviously, dock or anything like that.
Yes, so the big contention is whether you can go fish in those fisheries without actually having to anchor. Anchor is when you make a actual landfall. As far as the anglers go and any other international traffic, you can go back and forth. As long as you don't make anchor or any kind of landfall, you're good to go.
Interesting. All right. So then once everything comes back to normal, so to speak, that they'll be able to fish on both sides then.
Which would be huge because I know there's lots of good places to find some tiny little bays and scoop up some fish on the Canadian side.
I mean, again, it's the same river on either side, but are there better areas to fish by? Like near Clayton, they were talking about certain areas where there's more fish, or does it really matter at the end of the day?
I'm sure it does, and to someone who is more of an expert than I'm positive it does. I like to catch largemouth, which isn't what you find big ones of on the St. Lawrence River, but I really like topwater fishing. I like to see the fish attack. I think that's what gets my adrenaline pumping. I always look for more shallow bays that are shaded. I think that's what any bass fisherman would probably tell you. But if you want to get the big smallmouth, you're going to do some type of drop shot right on, where there's a drop off. Which with the Seaway, again, there's so many drop offs because there's what they had to cut out, and then there's the original.
What nature made.
Yeah,
sure.
So in Waddington, there's a place that me and my buddy we used to kayak out to, and it's on the American side, so we could anchor. And we'd anchor with cinder blocks in a kayak, and we just sit there with minnows all day, and you could watch the drop shot go down. And drop shot is just a hook with some type of bait and a sinker, and it goes straight down, and you could see just where that shallow would meet the deep, and as soon as it got dark, that's where you'd want it to be, and boom, you just get hit every time. And somehow my buddy, who was using the same bait as me, right next to me, could catch his limit, and I could catch like maybe one or two.
Yeah.
But
it's the luck of the draw, right, Alex? I mean, really, you could literally have the same bait be in the same spot, but get different results.
I think there's something about the talent, though. There is something about someone who, I mean, these people are for better or worse, whatever you want to call them, they are sportsmen. They are good at what they do. Some of these people went to college and were on college teams in order to, then get into the pros, just like you would basketball or hockey or anything like that. I think what's cool about fishing is it's just like what I think is like golf. Anybody can do it at any age. And, as long as you can still swing the club or get the fishing.
One thing I noticed about the Bassmasters tournament, there was one guy, I forget where he was from, and he was literally fishing underneath people's docks outside Clayton. And in fact, he was talking to them. Someone gave him a sandwich. Just flew. I said, "Do you realize you're on ESPN right now?" So here it is. And he came in the top 10. I think he came in like a 5th or 6th. But he was catching 6-pound bass underneath people's docks, whereas other people were in the channel, up in other areas, some out in the lake and whatnot. But he had this thing about docks. What's that all about? Why? Did he know something other people didn't take advantage of, or what?
When I was a kid, I had a babysitter, and right across the road was a tributary of the St. Lawrence. So it was like, I think it's Little Sucker Brook in Waddington. And I could sit on their dock and cast to the dock 10 feet from me with a daredevil lure and catch northern pike all day long. Huge northern pike that you wouldn't believe would be under that dock. I don't know what it is. I'm guessing it's shade. I'm guessing it's shallow, but it's also a very quick, the reason why you put a dock out is so that you can get your boat up there and then quickly get out to deeper water, right? So I'm guessing that it's probably the same thing with the fish. They can come up and, somehow feed and whatever they're feeding on and be in the shade. And if they need, quick way to get out, they're out of there.
Well, he was catching them, that's for sure.
Right.
And he became somewhat of a celebrity as a result of that because, again, you see spectator sports like football, basketball, especially, where the fans are right there. So it was very exciting, knowing, of course, that the river is very wide, very deep, not to mention the lake, but to see that engagement, if you will, between the fans and the actual fishermen, which was awesome. But here's the thing, Abu Garcia says the best fishing in the country. That's a huge thing. And then we say, all right, how do we capitalize on that? Do we go to I Love New York and get the bed tax money driven towards our area? Say, look what Abu Garcia said. Look what's happening to our fish. They're getting bigger up here. More and more people are staying in their state, staying within 300 miles from where they live now because of COVID-19. How do we take advantage of that? Of course, the main thing is, where do you get the money and where do you organize all that? So where do you start, Alex? Where do you start to promote the fact that this is now a fishing mecca of the United States?
Well, the greatest part about it is these Bassmaster folks have been praising this area since 2013. So it's already really started. like I said, these are sportsmen. These are athletes, right? If Michael Jordan decides to make a shoe, it's going to be, and says this is the best shoe, and I use it. These anglers are saying this is the best place, like you just said, this is the best place for fishing in the country, in the world. I fish here. That's gonna. If I could tell you, I mean, I'm sure you have to do this in your job, Josh. Is you go to a boat launch and just see the different state license plates that you see.
Exactly.
And I remember a huge bone of contention at the beginning of COVID. For some reason, one of the restrictions was you couldn't go boating. You couldn't go boating. You couldn't go fishing. It lasted for about maybe 2 days.
Yes, before.
And then it was retracted.
Right, right.
I think a lot of people have gotten into the sport just out of a necessity to do something in quarantine too.
Right.
I think that's a great thing as well. I think the way we start on capitalizing is obviously laying that groundwork, but things like this marina that we're trying to do in Waddington, access to the water, access to fishing locations. That's one thing, like I said, again, if you really wanted to, and there's going to be a lot of property owners that aren't going to like me for saying this, if there's any place in the affected zone that you want to go fishing off the bank, whether it's in someone's supposed backyard, the Power Authority owns from the water 25 feet in. So if you go anywhere along the river within the affected zone, which is from Messina all the way down to Lisbon, and you take your boat and you pull it up to someone's supposed backyard that they might have groomed for the last 50 years, you have this right to be there and fish on that ledge as long as it's 25 feet from the water. And that's one place that I guarantee there's no other place in the country. When carp fishing was the first big thing, the Brits would come over, and that's what they always said. Oh, if we have to pay private people to go on their property and fish their ponds and fish their lakes and rivers, over here it's all free. And I'm like, well, that's why we had the American Revolution in the first place.
Right.
Now, they do that 25 feet from the shore, or is it 25 feet from the center of the channel per the Seaway? Do you know?
Nope, from the water.
So
like where the
shoreline.
water, from the shoreline, it's 25 feet. So that's why walking trails and whatnot are so easy to put in, because you don't have to go through. I mean, it'd be nice to let the people know that essentially in their backyard there's going to be a walking trail or a dock or something like that. But at the end of the day, the New York State Power Authority, which means the people of New York State, own 25 feet to the water in the affected zone.
And are the Brits still coming?
They are. Carp fishing is still a huge thing up here. It's been put to the side a little bit because of how crazy the bass fishing has just exploded.
Right.
But same thing with walleye. Walleye are bigger than they ever were, and they were, I wouldn't say on the verge of extinction, but people were talking about how scarce they were 10 years ago.
Yeah, I know. They were huge when I first got, not to mention bullheads.
Yeah.
What happened to bullheads? I don't hear about bullheads anymore. I mean, am I missing something? Or what?
Just Black Lake now. But.
Yeah, I mean, they're easy to fit. They're easy to catch, right? I mean, you put it on a worm and you throw it in any body of water, and you're probably going to catch either a perch or a bullhead off of it. But I mean, they don't quite fight like a bass does. They don't quite fight like a carp is just a huge ton of a fish. And to bring one of those in, I mean, the pole is like 5 times the length of a regular pole. You're using braided line. It's
like you're
such
catching a shark.
Yeah, really. And the Brits are still coming. I mean, I live right across the road from Main Street Perk, the new bakery in Waddington. And you'll walk over there and you'll hear British accents.
Really?
And it's like, where are these guys coming from? And then you get the local guy that is the big carp guy.
Right.
He's showing them around. He's showing them where to go. So.
But what's the fascination with carp? I thought that wasn't good eating fish, or is it just the
fight?
Just the fight itself.
Just the fight itself, and it's always. I've really never seen anyone come to Waddington unless they were bow hunting the fish. Like the whatever they call that, bow fishing.
Yeah.
To try to eat the carp. It's always the fight, and they always are trying to do catch and release. Like if you meet an actual very skilled carp fishermen, I'm not exaggerating, it would bring a tear to their eye if they killed the carp that they caught.
Oh, I'm sure.
They want that carp to go back in and be caught by someone else. And we have
for another fight for another day.
Yeah, exactly. And we have the youth fishing tournament in Waddington for the carp for St. Lawrence County.
Right.
And that's amazing. Well, first of all, it's a huge fight for an average male adult, right? you got these kids. You can't be in this tournament unless you're 18
That's a
years
swordfish.
age.
Yeah.
And it's great. I did it every year. Every year when I was a kid, I did that.
Well, okay, so you're a young guy, and 10, 12 years ago, maybe longer than that someone from Harry Potter came down from Britain. He was like the celebrity sponsor of the event.
Tom Felton.
Okay, so explain that. So there is a British connection here.
Yeah.
So when you talk to British fishermen, when you bring up Waddington or the St. Lawrence River, they'll know exactly what you're talking about. It's the carp haven of the world, I guess,
Right.
to them.
Yeah.
So they bring down this kid who I didn't know, by the way, but everybody else did. But he was the reason why a lot of people were, gravitated to that, especially the young kids, because they need some celebrity snob appeal, if you will,
Right?
Some celebrity endorsement. So there was no secret that would be a good way to attract younger kids to the carp tournament, and that went very, very well. Were you a part of that as a young man?
I was. So Tom Felton played Draco Malfoy in the Harry Potter series. And he came to Waddington. I actually got to meet him twice. Once was, I think, a Channel 7 News did an article, and they had an interview and what it meant to me to be a carp fisherman and, all that kind of stuff. And the other one was they held this like opening ceremony in Messina. It was Messina Central School in the auditorium, and I was part of the Cub Scouts at that time. And we gave him a patch. We gave him some type of like patch and thanked him for coming. And I know my mom has those both on video that needs to be put over to DVD or whatever it is now.
You should.
But I was part of that, to be like, and the funny part about it was he was the villain in Harry Potter, right? He was like Harry Potter's like arch nemesis,
Right.
which if you keep watching the movies doesn't happen to be sort of towards the end, spoiler alert, but, growing,
we got to leave now.
but growing up, that it was like, oh, he's the bad guy. But then you met him and you're like, oh, he's just an actor and he's acting a part.
Right.
And he came up here, he coyote hunted. He did a bunch of different stuff, but the biggest thing that obviously attracted the kids to the sport was the carp fishing.
And they will have that tournament once again once COVID is over. So carp tournament for all ages, I'm assuming kids as well, will resume on the St. Lawrence.
Yeah, they actually did have an adult tournament last year during COVID, and they plan on having that one again this year and the children's one this year. I think they have some COVID guidelines that they can follow in order to do that.
Sure.
And the Bass Masters is going to happen. I think Messina's expecting four coming in this year.
That's what they were saying when on the latest.
Yeah.
Again, new tournaments, the return of the Bass Masters Elite Series to Waddington. So the sky is the limit. But again, I know I asked earlier, guys, but at the end of the day, how can we get the whole world to respond to this? Do we have enough hotel rooms on the river?
No.
That's always been a question about. A lot of hotels over the years obviously have fallen due to old disrepair or fires and whatnot. But even so, we need modern facilities to up to code and so forth. The River Edge, perfect example. The new hotel in Clayton. What's the name of it again?
The Harbor Hotel.
Harbor
Yep.
Hotel. A family out of Western New York. They have several of them, and they looked at that area with bated breath. Like, we got to be up in Clayton. And as a result of that, Clayton has gotten a lot more attention in recent days. So, do we have again? And as far as bed tax are concerned, it's all commensurate with the amount of bed or available hotels and rooms that a certain amount of tax money is extracted from all of that. Do we have enough to put into the, I guess, till, if you will, to promote this? I Love New York promotions. We see Bolt Castle quite a bit. Every now and then you'll say, oh, Bolt Castle, that's great. And then they go over to Western New York. Now, again, we're seeing that because we know Bolt Castle. Our New Yorkers in other areas like of the East Coast, Boston, Philadelphia, how can we reach them and the masses to let them know that the fishing haven of the planet, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that, because when you hear Abu Garcia say it's the best in the country, how do we get the resources and the mindset together, not to mention the money to make this happen, Alex?
It is a question.
It's a big question.
It is a
But it's an opportunity too,
I'm
Josh.
curious that the VRBOs have taken off. I've talked to a couple of people along the river. They're booked out a year in advance.
Amazing.
But we don't have the hotels, the cookie cutter places for people to stay.
Right.
But the VRBOs are taking off. I'm curious if the families travel with the fishermen. I'm not too familiar with that.
So in Waddington, the first year, not a lot of them did.
Okay.
Over the years, that now that they've known what Waddington can offer and that there's actually things that people can do while they're out fishing.
That's the kind
what
of
their
route
families can do.
that I'm going. If the families are traveling, if you could expand just the knowledge of what the river has to offer outside of castles.
Right.
Although that would be a good trip for the families to see as well. But when they're not fishing, do they have shopping? Do they have places to go recreate?
Right.
and do things that the family can enjoy. Even when the fisherman's not fishing, he can go out
Right.
and see what the river has to offer. I think I grew up 7 miles from the river and barely stepped foot on it as a young man, and didn't know anything about it because we just weren't in that, didn't have the opportunity to go out on boating and whatnot.
Now he works for the Border Patrol.
Yes.
So what does that tell you?
So just unconscious incompetence, right? They just don't know what's out there. So if you could spread the word and highlight a couple of the things that would pique people's interest, I think that would definitely bring more, if not internet traffic to the area, and then by that way we'll bring some people up to the area to check it out.
And it sounds too simple and almost too easy. And I guess what I'm also going to say is long, but you get that one family that comes here and falls in love. They buy a house.
Right.
They tell their friends and family.
Right.
You know, they bring them up here every year. The next generation buys a house up here. You know, it's in the other thing that we're blessed with up here is, you know, might not be for the people who have lived here all our lives, but compared to the rest of the world, we have a pretty low tax rate, especially for New York State.
And property values.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where it's like, oh, I can buy a house on the water for $250,000. Like, what?
They'll buy it on sight unseen in many cacases.
In cash. You know,
It's an amusement park that's created by nature,
Right.
that is free to enjoy.
Right.
And that's what's drawn me to the river. It's back at the turn of the century, you had the steel barons and the oil barons that would build big castles and sprawling complexes, but you could have the guy that's on a canoe with a sail and set it up and enjoy the very same area that the rich people are. So it's not a class thing. It's just the river ever runs through, and you can take advantage of it just like air.
And that's just
you just
like
have to know it's there and what's out there.
the American story right
American
there, right?
story,
Like, why did we start this in the first place? Because the king could only shoot the king's deer.
Exactly.
You know? So now we are in the wild, and it's everyone's deer, whoever can actually shoot it.
Do you know any of the history with Robert Moses and
Yeah.
bringing that whole seaway concept up to the North Country and the flooding of some towns and homes on the Canadian U.S. side? Is that
I've only lived it a little bit. You know, technically I haven't lived it, but because of all the people I've interacted with, being the elected supervisor in Waddington, it's a bone of contention, to say the least. But at the same time, you have to be able to respect what he did and how it was done and how it was kind of. What people don't understand is that was part of the infrastructure plan that Eisenhower had. You know, they always think, oh, the highways, Eisenhower,
right.
yeah.
Right.
Well, the Seaway was part of that. Eisenhower was in Messina with the Queen. You know, Richard Nixon was in Messina with the Queen. It was a huge undertaking.
Well, they at one point they had ships that were backed up. They couldn't get through because the water levels would recede sometime in, I'm assuming, October, November, and they got stuck there. I would assume they would have to go back to Cleveland or Detroit, wherever they came from. So they had to make a huge decision there. So Robert Moses, a major civil engineer of America, who basically ushered in the whole era of interstate highways like Route 80 and so forth, he was a very controversial figure, particularly down in New York City, where he was all part of urban renewal, which urban renewal affected Watertown back in the mid-'60s under Johnson. So it was a necessary evil, but the fruits of their efforts, as you said, Alex, earlier, said at the time, in the 50s and 60s, people were losing their lifestyle, they're losing their property. We saw that in the Tennessee River Valley. We saw that all across the country. But progress had to be made. And as a consequence, now Waddington is a huge force when it comes to the fishing. But at that said, it's a small town. It doesn't have enough hotel rooms to cater to or camping areas. So, again, I keep on coming back to that, Alex, because it's like, you're all dressed up, but you have nowhere to go.
Yeah.
We have the best fishing. How can people be accommodated to come up here, and how can we take advantage of that?
So I guess the first step, right, is, we were just talking earlier about the marina in Waddington. So we're going to be building a marina, about $3 million marina, right,
Nice.
right in the heart of Waddington. That's great. It's not even going to cost a taxpayer a dime. It's all New York State Power Authority funded money because they basically pay us reparations for taking our land all the way, back in the day. And it's a federal contract that we have with them that's negotiated every 50 years and then looked at every 10. Relicensing review comes up in 2023, and hopefully I'll be around for that. But as far as an elected official, I think I'm definitely going to be around in 2023. But the other thing is, I'm on the board of directors for the Clark House preservation. The Clark House is one of the oldest. The current structure was 1893, I believe. But before that, it was a wooden structure, and it was the hotel. It was one of the 3 hotels in Waddington. The other hotel, the Union Hotel, has been changed into apartments now, which is fine. It's full up all the time, so I have no problem with that. But the Clark House has been this, 25 years ago, they wanted to demolish it and turn it into a parking lot. So now we finally have, like you're saying, we need these locations, right? Right. I think we need to take state money, local money, private money, put it all together into places like the Clark House where we can save our history, but also modernize and make a little boutique hotel. I mean, that's all really Waddington needs. You got 40 rooms in a hotel. That's all Waddington would need. It'd be full out booked for those tournaments and probably booked, half capacity for most of the year.
I seem to remember a gentleman speaking at one point about getting some duplexes or something built as you head out towards Coal Creek, and maybe the town could benefit from that.
I'm sure.
It's been a while, but somebody floated that idea about some village-owned properties that they could be rented out. But
someone with forward thinking. I mean,
Yes.
we have investors right here. I mean, the proprietor of this building that we're in right now is a young guy. He's in his 30s, and he owns a tremendous amount of property up here. So that's who we need, obviously, up on the river. And we have that. We've always had that. But now opportunity because of COVID. And again, one thing I did speak with a realtor up on the river, and I've spoken to others inland as well as far as properties are concerned, that the real estate market right now, believe it or not, is a boom, particularly on waterfront. Even when Trump came here, when he was running for election back in 2016, he just couldn't believe the amount of waterfront. So we know when you have taxation, when you have properties on the waterfront, a lot of young blood coming in, taking out old bungalows, old places that were built in the 40s and 50s and replacing them, upgrading. So the assessment values are going up. And I'm thinking, in the back of my mind, obviously, as you can tell, I'm thinking, where can we build a better and bigger foundation for money? And it's happening right now, Alex, right?
So specifically in Waddington, one thing that we've talked about, we have something called the Local Government Task Force. It's all the affected municipalities by the St. Lawrence Seaway project, right? That we are the group that negotiates that every 10-year review.
Right.
The last time they had the review, they fought hard, and they got the money that we're going to be using for the marina, which is great. Same thing with the Messina intake. They're doing a huge expansion over there, and that's why Messina has been able to book all of these great tournaments, because they have this huge facility now that the Power Authority built for them, right? But one thing that's been a bone of contention since the beginning of time, as far as this Seaway stuff goes, is everyone's always said, we want our land back. Give us our land back. Well, here's the thing. We've had the land for over 20 years now, and it's still just sitting there. It's just in town property hands. So town of Waddington has, we call it the Iroquois Dam property. You know that very well.
Sure do.
There's Iroquois Dam, and then there's a bunch of property from Highway 37 all the way back to the dam. It's now owned by the town. All premier prime real estate right on the water. Same thing with Leachman Point over by the beach in Waddington. It's this huge point that was created by the Seaway. It used to just be a regular peninsula that was the same level as everything else. And then they put all the spoils on it. So it's this huge mountain, if you will, that just has these incredible views of the river, of Canada, of downtown Waddington. Ogden Island is a 3-mile long island in Waddington that's on the American side between America and Canada, right in the middle of the river. We can't touch that. New York State won't let us touch it. That's a problem in itself. But what we've been discussing with the relicensing review is we want the New York State Power Authority to help us build the infrastructure. Great, you gave us the land back so we can tell the people in our hometown, we got the land back that they took 70 years ago. But what are we going to do with it? Just let it sit and be off the tax rolls for the next 70 years, but in town hands? We need to be able to have the money not only to build the infrastructure, but to also market that property.
Right.
And guess what? As far as I'm concerned, I wouldn't mind selling that property below, what is considered a fair, not a fair price, but a premium price, whatever it would be.
Sure.
We have to sell it for fair market value, but fair market value
might not be enough
for an assessor up here is really low.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is, what someone from the city would pay for waterfront property, we would sell it less than that, right? And we wouldn't mind if it was going to local people or if it was going to somebody from out of here. But the problem is, a lot of these properties that are the prime properties there's no water, there's no sewer, there's no electric, there's no road getting back to it. So how are we, as the town, supposed to just take taxpayer money and dump all of it into there just so that we can get a new property on the tax rolls And guess how much they're paying in taxes just to the town of Waddington? 2.14 per thousand. 2.14 per thousand, because we keep our taxes low for our people. We're one of the lowest, taxes in the county for the town, and we're on the river. So my thing is, it's got to be a joint venture, and it's got to be something that makes sense. I don't think just selling all the land for $100,000 just to get it back on the tax roll is going to do anything, because it's not going to equate to anything. $100,000 at 2.14 per thousand. What's that? $214 a year that we're getting, maybe less.
So maybe like the Seaway, that investment may pay off in the long run, but to realize that return will take a long time, and investors have to see what you see along that riverfront. But I've been to Iroquois. There are foundations up there from the camps and the kitchens that used to be for the guys that built that Iroquois lock system and the dam, and it's nice and flat up there. It's not swampy. It's buildable land.
And it's the other thing about it is it's not farmable. It's not very good land to farm on. So you're not ticking off the farmers by taking away, stuff that they could be using for fertile soil. Sure. But it's prime property, and I would love to see something happen with it, but we need to build that infrastructure, So
I mean, I'm being optimistic because, again, the Bassmaster Elite Series last year was tremendous. And, again, that's coming from someone who has no clue about fishing whatsoever. But when something is highlighted about our area, and let's face it, the Thousand Islands is a beautiful area. We know that. Maybe not the greatest area during the winter, and I hate to downplay it that way, but obviously our winters are more harsh in this area than others. But between May 31st, right around Memorial Day, right through October, guys, it seems like our falls are getting longer and longer. We just have so many opportunities to take advantage of the fact that the fishing has gotten better because of invasive species and because of the zebra mussels and so forth. All these things that look like it was a lemon, but we've made lemonade out of all this. And Alex, as a young guy in politics and whatnot, can someone bring legislation to Albany or perhaps to the feds to see if we can enhance things here for the future, or is that too premature at this point?
The biggest thing for me, the place where I think you could really make a difference, like I said, every 50 years there's a federal relicensing with the Power Authority and with the Seaway. In those affected towns, I think I am one of them. I am the town supervisor of Waddington, right? Those towns are going to need help, right? If this region could come together, if all the politicians, no matter if they're a Democrat, Republican, communist, freaking anything, that's the issue here. Everything's become such a political divide, and I'm not going to get into that discussion. But if we could all be a united front along the river, whether you're down in Clayton and you're not even in the affected zone, or if you're up in Messina and you're at the heart of the affected zone,
right?
Messina, Louisville, Waddington, and Lisbon. Those are the 4 affected towns by the Seaway. They're the 4 towns that are actually going to get a say every 50 years. The next one is 2053.
Oh, boy.
Which the crazy part is, I think that's closer than 1990.
Yeah.
So anyway.
It is.
That is the next opportunity we're going to get for big change.
Could we speed that up by any chance?
I'm sure so the Power Authority always says,
due to COVID,
if we ever need anything, we can always go to them. The problem is you never have the teeth to really make anything happen. That is when their federal license is up. The state cannot operate that dam unless they have their federal license.
Isn't that something? So
if we had, whoever it is, I know Chuck Schumer's been there for a long time, but he's not going to be there in 2053.
No,
I can tell you that.
No.
Whoever's in Chuck Schumer's position in 2023, if we had someone who is in the same position as Chuck Schumer right now, whether you like him or not, Chuck Schumer is the majority leader of the Senate. If you have the majority leader of the Senate as one of your representatives from New York, when 2053 rolls around, get him in line with your congressman or woman, in line with your state assemblyman, state senator, all the local officials, have everything ready to go. Bring in the biggest law firm you can from New York City to help you with the argument, and get it done. It was almost sad the last time around. They had local attorneys. They didn't have any help. It was the big guys picking on the little guys, and the Power Authority hates when we bring this up. But Buffalo, they had to go through a relicensing in Buffalo too. Buffalo got all that Riverwalk stuff, everything at the Buffalo Billion, that all happened because of the relicensing. And they got such a sweet deal compared to us, and it's because they got the population, they got the politicians, they got everything they need to do in order to make sure that they get the funding that they need. We need that up here, and it's going to take a big effort, and it's going to take years. And that's why I'm talking about it now, because 2053 is the next time we're going to be opening that up.
I got to ask you this. As far as you've probably been around the country, in Canada for that matter, is there an ideal region down in Alabama where I hear the fishing is great in Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, Tennessee, Kentucky? It's like all of a sudden, wait a minute, St. Lawrence has the best fishing? What would be a good model area to kind of, what would your opinion be, Alex, of, say a village in some river off the Mississippi? Is there anything that we should model against or compare to in the future?
So for me, and then I'm seeing Josh is nodding his head, so I'm going to let him talk on this issue. But what I've always told people is every town along the St. Lawrence River has their niche, right? I can't even think of it right now. Pulaski, they're trout, right?
Well, the salmon. Yeah,
salmon, that's what it is. Yeah.
Big
so Pulaski, salmon.
Yeah.
Pulaski, salmon.
Right.
Okay, great.
Oswego, too.
So if Waddington is bass, great. Waddington might be bass and carp. Who knows? It might be a region thing, but every town that's on the river can utilize the river in whatever way they want. Whether they're like Clayton, I always think of Clayton as like the premier, like ritzy, common man can go and feel fancy type of place.
Exactly.
And that's awesome. And I've tried to model if you've ever seen our pavilion we have in Waddington, we've tried to model ourselves after Clayton because what I want to get to is that small town that you see in every Hallmark movie.
Right.
With the Main Street and the Apple Fest and everybody knows everybody. But if someone comes in who's new, they're welcomed and with open arms.
That's Waddington.
We could look at places like St. Augustine or St. Simon's Islands, Georgia, big fishing communities, and you see their masts dangling in the seas from miles away. So there's a marina nearby as you're driving through. But it's not outside the realm of possibility, like you said, burying cable lines and making nice fancy street lights. Even like a Savannah with all the Spanish moss.
Exactly.
And but you got to have the vision for it, and you have to be a good salesman, which we could probably pull off if we wanted to. So I'll start working on that and the kitchen at my house, and we'll see what shakes out first. But
I'll do a bathroom at my house.
Yes.
Can you help?
But I like that. You can niche it down. So this area is known for this, and like Clayton, that wooden boat, antique boat museum.
Yeah.
That's their thing. So you can draw on that and expand on that. But I like the idea of each community developing its own character and then selling that character.
Perfect example. Clayton and Sackett's Harbor. They're almost too close, right? And you're like, oh, how they compete with each other? No, you get the history people that are like, oh my God, Sackett's Harbor, and they go to Sackett's Harbor, but even like the architecture, you got that like old, everything's from like late 1700s to early 1800s for architecture, right in Sackett's Harbor, and then in Clayton it's more late 1800s. That typical Main Street that you see just like here with all the flat roofing and whatnot. When you go to Sackett's Harbor, it's like
a lot older. And who could forget, we're just the proximity from Cape Vincent to Kingston. Kingston is a 400-year-old city. And you can see it. You feel like you're walking through the streets of Europe somewhere in Belgium. So that history, so there's so much of an attraction to this area. There's no question. But getting back to my question earlier, these other areas like Augustine or areas in Arkansas or in Georgia, do they have the hotels? Do they have the accommodations to say, okay, we have a tournament? Look, you can't have a Super Bowl in every city in America, especially a Super Bowl. Like you couldn't have one in Buffalo. You just couldn't do it. It has nothing to do with the weather. You couldn't accommodate all the people there. So when you have 4 tournaments coming in and a future filled with fish, bass, walleye, whatever you want to say, carp, can you accommodate all the people within the time frame between May and October? Do they have big hotels down in these small areas, Josh?
They do. And speaking of Waddington, I know they didn't get blindsided with an event coming their way. I'm sure that someone did a feasibility study, and if we wanted to do that for the other river communities, someone could put together that feasibility study and be like, listen, if we want this to continue, and we could take it to the board and pitch it, you have to give us either discounted rates on some riverfront properties or riverfront land so that developers can be incentivized to come in and build, because as more people come in and this takes off, and I'm even hearing wind of 3 more tournaments coming into Cape Vincent. We talked about that one kind of fizzling as of late. But offer some incentives for developers. And my background's in construction too. You have to have 80 cents on the dollar. If it's not going to make any sense, you're not going to get any return. So you could do those feasibility studies, say there's no place for people to stay. If they come in transit, there's no parking for people to park their boats. I know the spillway in Messina was a launch that they just put in. Not the spillway, was
Intake?
the intake. So they expanded the intake. We used to launch our boats there for work,
Right.
and they've expanded that quite a bit. But maybe initially set up just a de facto team to go out and start doing the market research and figuring out what would be needed, how much money that'll cost, what kind of grants and things are associated. And
one thing that, I'm going to kind of play devil's advocate here just because it's my experience. We brought these people to Waddington and we didn't have any place for them, but we brought the tournament. People stepped up, offered the people to come into their homes. A lot of people did it just because that's who they are in Waddington, right? But some people capitalized on it. Here's a great opportunity right here, or a great story right here. Guy who owns the local liquor store in Waddington, just bought the local liquor store maybe 3 years ago. Insurance company moved out this nice little, it's been there for 50 years, a nice little shack. I call it a shack, whatever. It's a place where they set up shop. And so he bought it, took 3 months, refurbished the entire thing, made it into a 1-bedroom Airbnb. And that's all it is an Airbnb.
Right.
Because he knows that there's going to be a time when they're going to need it. Right. When he was building it, people were asking him if they could rent it out for 3 months at a time. That's something that we've seen with COVID. People can work remotely, so they're like, "Oh, I'm going to go this place for whatever."
Right.
So I guess I'll also say I'm a fan of capitalism as well. But like people are seeing, there's a lack of this,
Right.
and they're taking it upon themselves.
Right.
So there's also that working in tangent as well. What I'd like to see, and what I would like to study a little bit more while you were just talking. Was what happened with the Olympics in Lake Placid. How did they accommodate people? I hear stories that they took some of them to the local community college and put them up there, all these different things. And then, like a stroke of luck, Miracle on Ice happens, 1980, right?
Big time.
And now everybody's like, Lake Placid, I know what Lake Placid is. Miracle on Ice happened there. Like everybody knows where Lake Placid is because Miracle on Ice happened there. They had the Olympics there in 1932. Everything was easy back, in the day. Like there was probably like 3 people in the Olympics in 1932.
Right.
But
Sonia Henning.
Right, but then you had 1980 happen, and I hear, like I said, I hear stories of local community college. That's where they kept some of the people. People were staying in other people's houses.
Well, they had the prison there that was converted. It was dual purpose. It was going to be a prison, but for the Olympic Village, it was their village, and then became a prison afterwards.
And now they've had these beautiful hotels built since then,
right?
Because and they still have the Olympic facility there, so the Olympic people can actually still come and train for the. It's
Lake Placid has seen its ups and downs though since 1980. In fact, the actual toboggan run, the bobsled run was state of the art, and that went into disrepair. But they have since fixed that. But it's possible that New York City could get the actual Winter Olympics and obviously utilize the Catskills and the Adirondacks and Saranac Lake, which is bigger than Lake Placid.
Right.
So there's that opportunity. Could it ever happen? Could it come back again? Well, now that the rules have changed, if you can introduce New York as I guess you can say the ceremonial area, especially for the hockey, which would make sense because a lot of the NHL players play now in the Olympics. Who knows? That could happen. We'd love to see that. I wish I was at the 1980 Olympics. I heard it was a fantastic thing. I don't even know if you were born at that time.
I was not. But I tell you what, like the thing, I guess what I'm trying to bring it all back in, right? Like if there could be a 1980 Olympics, where the Miracle on Ice happened event for Waddington, like what would I see that event? Bassmasters is great, right? Yeah. But there's this untapped potential with the festival that we hold around the tournament. The biggest name I think we've had was we had a guy that was on American Idol or something, or maybe it was Travis Tritt or somebody like that came and played, right?
Yeah.
I would love
not Travis Trout.
So he was on Harry Potter too, then.
Yeah, right. But I would love to see Steve Miller.
Yeah.
But Steve Miller brings out people I went to Steve Miller in Watertown.
Yeah, a couple years ago.
Yeah, a few years ago, and it was packed.
It was.
But could you imagine having a free concert at the Bassmaster tournament right after the weigh-in?
Right.
Steve Miller.
Right.
So maybe this is a question for you, Glenn.
Yeah.
The communities, are they getting involved in more of the going out to see venues and small musical gatherings and things? I know, like Sackett's Harbor has the old comedy store or the comedy club.
They did.
And
Not any longer. No.
Yep.
That's
I've seen small musical acts there where there's 20, 30 people at most.
Right.
Little open bar, and they bring them in. I know there's old buildings that could be set up like that, just a little bit of but I don't know if you see that trend. No. Are kids these days going out and enjoying those things? Even post-COVID, would that be something that's sustainable?
I think once COVID is officially gone, and in some states it already is, like in Texas and so forth, I just think that people are going to be irking to get out. So the sky is the limit, although the statistics show right now that people are going to be hesitant to go to public places. But eventually all that will flatten out, if you will. But the need for entertainment and the need to get out of the house and do family events, I think that's going to be paramount. And I think a lot of people are definitely going to come to the table for that. So in as far as what DPAO does with the Steve Miller concert and so forth, it was very expensive, by the way, Alex. It's incredible how much he costs.
Really?
But you can get other up-and-coming acts. And in fact, at the end of the day, now you can probably get someone for a lot less, or maybe someone, you're not going to get Kiss up here, but you could get someone that is up and coming. I just think the aspect of just having live concerts, it doesn't matter who it is,
right,
coupled with an actual tournament, it doesn't matter. It just adds flavor to all of that.
I mean, in our regular concert series that we have every Friday night, hopefully we can do it this year.
Let's go 3 years from now, 2024. What does the St. Lawrence River look like from Messina all the way down to Cape Vincent, in your opinion, guys?
Well, there's going to be a brand new marina in Waddington. Like you just said, with the Canadian border, it's going to be open back up again. And I think there's going to be even more of a reinsurgence, even more than before, of Canadians wanting to come over here and experience what we have over here, and vice versa.
Right.
I see just untapped potential. I see more homes. We had 4 or 5 homes being built in Waddington just on the water this last year.
Right.
So, as long as that waterfront property is available, there's going to be people who are going to come and buy it and want to utilize it. It's young families that have 2-person income that are doing well for themselves, state jobs, building nice houses on the water for their
and
families
working
to enjoy.
remotely, like you said.
Yes.
Yeah.
Big one.
Yeah.
So the world changed, guys. Do we benefit from this? Especially when you
Absolutely.
have this background, it's called the St. Lawrence River?
If you're not geographically dependent anymore, why would you not want to look out and listen to a loon and the sunset? And that's what makes the U.S. side a little bit better, if I'm going to go ahead and say that.
Go right ahead.
We get the nice sunset. So
We do.
If you're not geographically dependent, why would you not? And if there is a turn in the market, if the real estate bubble does burst, those people's second homes are the first ones to go.
Right.
And it makes opportunity for people to come in and update those homes. So
Right.
just in my scope of work and being along that river, people are updating things left and right.
Quality waterfront is like gold.
It is.
Really
It
is.
is.
It maintains its value and then some. So it's only going to get better.
And then, if I could, 2014 is back in effect.
Right.
They are maintaining those levels. Last time I talked to somebody in the National Joint Commission. So the flooding should not be an issue. I think they looked at levels up as far as Lake Superior to see what would be happening downriver and down the flow from that. So we should be anticipating that there's no damage that we've experienced, like Hurricane Sandy and all that stuff.
Levels are really low now.
Yes.
Are you alarmed by that?
Not alarm, but
I mean, we got a decent amount of rain
Yes,
recently, but
yes.
we had a little less than 80 inches here in Jefferson County as far as snowfall is concerned. So it looks like we're starting out really low going into the season. Hopefully that won't be a factor.
difficult is you have the one point of authority that's making all those calls and which lever they're turning to try to get the levels of the river
Right.
30 miles up.
Right.
So hopefully they get it dialed in and the river will be open for recreating all summer long.
And
Tell you what, the more water that comes through, the more money the local affected towns get. It's called
Yeah.
high flow money. We got about $100,000 worth of it this year, so we're putting it towards a new plow truck.
Good. Well, good. But I think they were very cognizant of 2017 and 2019, and now whoever's holding the trigger there at the dams and the locks rather in Messina, I think they're let out too much water, guys, or is it just me? Are they just being overly cautious, or?
So the fortunate thing about Waddington and Louisville is that we are between both the dams. We've got Robert Moses and we've got Iroquois. And Iroquois isn't a power dam. It's just used to control the water. So we've actually, even when the water is considered high in Waddington, it's not affecting any buildings or anything. Why? Because the Power Authority owns 25 feet to the water.
There you go again.
Why don't we just
The
emplace
lesson of the day.
Why don't we just emplace some turbines at Iroquois and start generating power at the Iroquois Dam?
Already got it built.
Done.
Already got it built.
Right.
We fixed it
Do it on
before
the-
lunch.
Do it on the American side.
Yep.
And one thing we haven't even talked about as far as quality of life is we could talk all about fishing and just the way it is up here for so many months out of the year. The school districts are just fantastic up here. So that's something that a lot of people are take into consideration when they move from, say, Long Island or Philadelphia or wherever. But a lot of people are migrating out of the cities to a better place. So again, with what Abu Garcia said, not to mention the resurgence of more fishing tournaments that you guys have illustrated today. If you want to reflect on our closing comments, what do you think about about all the new tournaments and how that can help us here, Josh?
So tournaments too. That's the big draw. But what hits home for me is we are actually part of something called the International Great Loop. I don't know if you ever heard of that.
Never did.
Either of you guys. So the Great Loop covers the upstate New York, even to the Cal systems, down to New York City and the Hudson, all the way along the eastern seaboard, Gulf of Mexico, all the way up to Mississippi, and you end up in the Great Lakes, up by Detroit, I think it is. But if you have a large enough vessel that'll support you and has the certain capacity to take you a certain amount of distance, you can circumnavigate the entire east coast of the U.S.
Wow.
So just being along that river, and even if you don't go that far, if you start in Waddington, you can go all the way to Cape Vincent in a day, and all the way back, and all the stops in between. So I think of things like the Rideau Canal, and if you get on that canal and you can stop and get a cheeseburger or some poutine, make the river something along those lines where you have several stops that tourists want to stop and get off their boat and go visit and see the sights. But the opportunity is there.
Yeah, those cruise ships have been. I've been seeing a lot of them come by, in Clayton particularly.
We stopped cruise ships from Jamaica. I've encountered British citizens, even a guy from Melbourne, Australia, doing carp fishing down there with their little meatballs. I'm not sure what the bait is. But
Boilies.
Boilies. He's got
Is that what it is?
a 4-pole setup, and he's got a really strange accent. I'm like, you're not from here. He's like, oh, yeah. But it's like you said, unlimited possibilities. We just
So you get to see all of it, Josh. You know exactly who's coming and going.
It's crazy. And people are coming and going more than you could ever anticipate. And that river is it's a floating boundary. It's an imaginary line that just accepts, and it's insane.
Yeah, it is. And I went to Wellesley Island to Thousand Islands Park about 10, 12 years ago, and it was in the middle of the summer, and I just couldn't believe the ships there. I just couldn't believe all the yachts. And they had to have their own pilot, their own captains, because no one would be able to navigate those. So we're talking real money. A lot of them are out of Toronto area, it seemed. So yes, a lot of that comes in. We just want to keep it here. That's all. Because we haven't gotten into this, but in future episodes, we'll talk about the history of all the hotels and how the railroad system back in the 1850s, 1860s, even during the Civil War, were so instrumental to the development of Northern New York. But that's for a later episode with these guys. Gentlemen, first of all, this was our first episode. Thanks for being with us today on Living the St. Lawrence, and thanks for coming. And we'll be talking more about the St. Lawrence in the future right here